in your talk. So let's start with our amazing co-chairs of the consortium who basically organized the two events for us this year, a traditional one and as well as this virtual one. So we have Jake, Wendy, Saehee, and myself. So Jake, would you like to start with the introduction?
Yeah, hi everybody. Really glad everybody could be here today. I'm Jake Barnes. I'm a rising fourth year PhD student at the Rutgers School of Management and Labor Relations, and I'm interested in topics around labor standards, compliance and enforcement, collective action, and comparative political economy.
Thank you, Jake. Now let's welcome Wendy. Wendy?
Hi, everyone. Oh, did you call my name or was it Wendy?
You can go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I thought it was Saehee. Oh, so I'm Saehee. I'm a fourth-year doctoral student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm studying strategic human resource management in organizations that are highly based on knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Saehee. Now let's have Wendy. Wendy?
Wendy, you're muted, I think.
Yeah.
Your audio.
Oh, sorry. Hi, I'm Wendy. I'm a rising third year PhD student at UNC Charlotte's Organizational Science program. So I do a lot of research on employee outcomes, employee well-beings, and also looking at high performance work systems.
Thank you, Wendy. So now I will introduce myself. My name is Qian. I'm from the Center for Industrial Relations and Human Resources in University of Toronto. My research is on strategic human resource management. So now I would like to have Alexander to introduce yourself. Hello.
Hey, okay. Hey, I'm Alex. I'm a PhD student at MIT in the Institute for Work and Employment Research, and I'm interested in worker control and involvement in the organization of work.
Nice to meet you, Alex. Now we have Zhang. Zhang.
Thank you. I'm John Codd, PhD student at Nova Southeastern University. I surely am the newest PhD because I just successfully defended just 3 days ago. My interest is in traditional labor relations, and I'm still getting used to using those initials.
Thank you, John. Congratulations. And now we have Adam. Hi, Adam.
Hey, right. Hi, I'm Adam. I'm a first-year PhD student in the IRR school in Cornell. My interest is broadly in migrant worker and global investment.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Adam. Now, can I have Alisa Hannon? Excuse me if I pronounce your name not correctly.
Oh, no problem. Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Hannon. I'm a PhD student at Rutgers University. I just finished my first year. I come from the economic development and workforce development space as a practitioner, so I'm interested in sort of the roles of skills and education in the empowerment of workers.
Thank you, Alisa. Now, can I have Andrew to introduce yourself a little?
Hi, I'm Andrew Minster. I'm a rising third year at MIT Sloan's Institute for Work and Employment Research. And I work on the way that lived experience and cultural competence are included into hiring and training and working conditions for frontline healthcare workers. And so how that affects worker well-being as well as patient outcomes.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Andrew. Now, can I have Dason Zhang?
Yeah, it's Dason. Nice to meet you all. I'm rising third year in Michigan State Human Resources and Labor Relations, and my research interest is in the quality of workers' life and facing the technological change.
Great, nice to meet you, Dyson. Now, can I have Allie? Allie Mobility. Okay, probably Allie will introduce herself a little bit later. Now, I see.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes. Hi.
Okay, sorry, I had unmuted by. All right, so I'm a fourth year PhD student at the University of Glasgow. I'm doing my PhD in management, and it focuses on human sustainability, relational coordination, and worker outcomes.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you all.
So now can I have Haesuk? Haesuk Zhang, who just joined us.
Hi, is it like introducing myself?
Yes,
Oh,
please.
okay.
Thank you.
I just came in, so I didn't know what's going on here. So, hi, my name is Haesuk. A PhD candidate at Kang University. What else should I? So,
yeah,
my research interest?
Yes, please.
So I'm interested in how HR practices can impact on organizational outcomes, basically strategic human resource management. And also what I'm working on recently is how unstable and unpredictable schedules can impact on union level outcomes.
Thank you, Haesuk. And now can I have Jen Hammer, my longtime colleague.
Thanks, Jen. And thanks to all the organizers today for bringing us here. My name is Jen Harmer. I'm from the Center for Industrial Relations and Human Resources at the University of Toronto. I'm a fourth year PhD candidate, and I study HRM in unions. So actually looking at how unions manage their own affairs. Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. Now can I have Jenna?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Jenna Myers, a rising sixth year in work and organizations at MIT Sloan, and I'm interested in worker voice and employee involvement around new technologies in the workplace, as well as frontline worker training, workforce development, and career pathways.
Thank you, Jenna. Nice to meet you. Now can I have Johnny, please?
Hey everybody, I'm Johnny Callis. I'm a rising third year at Cornell's ILR school, and I'm interested in strikes and labor militancy in the US, especially in the healthcare and education sectors. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you. Now can I have John Oak?
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, my name is Zhang. I'm rising sixth year at Rutgers University School of Management and Labor Relations. I mostly work on the companies that are owned by employees, also on democracy and participation in the workplace, and workers' perception of justice and fairness. Oh, and this photo was taken like 12 years ago. I don't have that long hair anymore. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you. Thank you. And now can I have Justin?
Hi, everyone. My name is Justin Vinton. I'm entering my fourth year at the Rutgers School of Management and Labor Relations. Broadly speaking, I'm interested in labor management partnership, high performance work systems, and their impact on middle management.
Thank you, Justin. Nice to meet you. Now can I have Qian?
Hello, everyone. My name is Qian. I'm a fourth year doctoral student at the University of Illinois. And my research interest is on employment relations as an organizational identity, job quality, and the linkage between employer strategy and employment outcomes. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you, Qian. Now can I have Laura?
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Carver. I'm a second year PhD student
at the ILR school, and I'm interested in high-skilled migration and migration policy.
Nice to meet you, Laura. Now can I have Matt, please?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Hinkle. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate at Michigan State University, and I'm interested in studying labor market issues in the construction industry and also employment relations issues in sports. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you, Matt. Now can I have Matthew? Matthew?
Hi, everyone. Nice to be with you. Thanks for organizing. I'm a rising fifth year at the ILR school at Cornell and interested in commodity chains and employer and worker strategies in them. Thanks.
Thanks, Matthew. Now can I have a Saehee? Sam.
Oh, hi, everybody. My name is Saehee Kang, assistant professor at Marquette University, and I graduated Rutgers University last year.
Nice to meet you, Saehee.
Good to see you. Yeah.
Now can I have Saehee?
Hey, hi, this is Salil. I'm a rising fifth-year PhD candidate at the School of Human Resources and Labor Relations at Michigan State. And my research interests are gender and work, informal work, labor and migration, and the implications for labor in global supply chains. Thank you so much. It's great to meet you all.
Thank you. It's great to meet you too. Now can I have a Salem, please?
Hi, I'm Selen from University of Pompeu Fabra in Spain. I'm a second-year PhD student working on the impacts of climate change on the protection of workers' rights. So nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Now can I have a Yaminati?
Yeah, Yaminat.
Yaminat.
I'm a
Sorry.
At the Heller School at Brandeis University, and I study worker well-being and work organization for frontline healthcare and social service workers. And I'm a public health social worker by training, so happy to be here.
Yeah, good to have you. Thank you. Now, last but not the least, can I have Yao?
Cool. Hi, can you hear me? Okay, good. Hi, everyone, old and new friends. And I'm Yao, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Center for Industrial Relations and Human Resources, and also a longtime colleague to Qian. And I'm rising sixth year, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, I'm rising sixth year and wrapping up very soon. And I'm interested in the new developments in the professional fields.
Thank you, Yao. I hope I didn't miss anyone, your group yet. Did I miss anyone? Please raise your hand please just go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself now I have anyone. Li Fei. Hi. Li Fei. I think she hasn't set up for the audio yet. I will ask Li Fei to introduce herself maybe later. And now we still have a little more time for the next part. Good.
All right, yes. So we got through the introductions a little bit quicker than we anticipated, I guess. So we have about 10, 12 minutes until Steve is scheduled to go on. Steve, if you'd like, we can get things going earlier, or we can take a quick break. I will defer to you on that. Either is totally fine.
He might not be here.
Yeah.
Oh,
I see
wait,
him. I don't
he's
know if you
here.
can
Okay.
hear. Yeah.
Sorry. Steve, you're muted. Your
Steve,
audio.
can you hear? Yeah.
Your audio is.
Okay, so I could start earlier if you like. My wife came into the room before and I set up audio.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, we can do that. So I'll, so yeah, we can get started and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A then. So, all right, great. Well, so yeah, to kick off the consortium, we're very excited to have Steve Greenhouse here. Steve Greenhouse was a reporter for the New York Times from 1983 to 2014, covering a range of topics around labor in the workplace during a crucial period in the history of American labor and employment relations. He's the recipient of multiple prestigious awards in journalism, including the Society of Professional Journalists Deadline Club Award, a New York Press Club Award, a Gerald Loeb Award for Distinguished Business and Financial Reporting, and the Hillman Prize for Book Journalism for his 2009 book, The Big Squeeze, Tough Times for the American Worker. His recent book, Beaten Down, Worked Up, The Past, Present, and Future of American Labor, takes an in-depth and stirring look at working people in America, the challenges they face, and the ways in which they can be re-empowered. The book has been received with widespread acclaim, with former Secretary of Labor Robert Reich calling it, quote, deeply inspiring and profoundly important. And the New York Times Book Review calling it, quote, the New York Times Book Review concluding that Steve, quote, achieves a near impossible task, producing a page-turning book that spans a century of worker strikes without over-condensing or oversimplifying, and with plausible suggestions for the future. So we're really honored to have him here to kick off the consortium with his unique and invaluable perspective on contemporary labor issues. He is going to be talking for around 20 to 25 minutes. And then when he's done with his presentation, we will open it up for Q&A. So without further ado, thanks so much again, Steve, on behalf of all of us, and we really look forward to it.
Thank you for that very nice, generous introduction, Jake. I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to be speaking to LERA's PhD Consortium. I'm sorry we have to do this virtually and that the pandemic is preventing us from meeting in person in Portland. I talked to you at an extraordinary time, at a historic time. We're caught in the middle of the worst pandemic in a century. We're in the middle of a daunting economic collapse. Tens of millions of Americans losing their jobs and countless businesses have closed. We are witnessing a huge and historic wave of racial justice protests in response to the horrific killing of George Floyd, merely the latest unjustified police killing of an African-American, following the killings of Eric Garner, Philando Castile, Tamir Rice, Michael Scott. I could go on. If one talks about sustainability, this is the opposite of sustainability. We've often heard that the darkest hour is just before the dawn. We as a nation are in a very dark, we in a world are in a very dark hour right now. And I'm sorry, I can't promise that we're just before the dawn. But despite the darkness out there, I see several very promising, idealistic things going on, including the responses to the pandemic and the George Floyd killing. I'm sorry to say, many employers disgrace themselves in how they've handled COVID-19 with regard to their workers. I've written about various McDonald's restaurants in California not supplying masks or sanitizer, not even hand soap to their employees. Some Amazon warehouses had just 1 or 2 hand sanitizer dispenser bottles for their 4,000 or 5,000 workers. I've written about Walmart cashiers whose bosses had ordered them not to wear masks that they had bought for themselves. The bosses said the mask frightened customers who idiotically thought that wearing a mask meant the cashiers had COVID-19. And then there is the meatpacking industry. At Smithfield's pork processing plant in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, at least 900 workers contracted the coronavirus. At a Tyson plant in Logansport, Indiana, at least 1,031 workers tested positive. At a Tyson plant in Storm Lake, Iowa, at least 550 workers tested positive. And that was more than a month after Tyson said it had taken great strides to improve safety. At the JBS beef plant in Greeley, Colorado, at least 8 workers died from COVID-19. The European Union's meatpacking industry has 2/3 as many workers as the US meatpacking industry. Yet, according to an article in Mother Jones, 9 times as many US meatpacking workers have died from the coronavirus. 24,715 in the US versus 2,670 in Europe. And more than 20 times as many US meatpacking workers have died, 86 versus 4 in Europe. Again, this is the opposite of sustainability. And we have a president who, rather than sympathize with the frightened, endangered meatpacking workers, our president has issued an executive order in effect saying, damn the torpedoes, damn the coronavirus, full speed ahead, you gotta keep the meatpacking plants open. The good news is there have been promising responses. We've often heard that low-wage non-union workers are too scared to stand up and speak out and walk out. Yet we've seen walkouts by McDonald's workers and Pizza Hut workers and Amazon workers and Whole Food workers and Instacart workers and Uber and Lyft drivers protesting that their employers have done far too little to protect them against the coronavirus. And after the inexcusable killing of George Floyd, the biggest protests in decades have erupted across the US and in many other countries. These may be as big or even bigger than the anti-Vietnam War protests of the 1960s and 70s and the civil rights protests of the 1960s. As I said, we are living in a historic moment. Indeed, there seems to be too much history at this moment. And you, as graduate students, as researchers, are both lucky and unlucky to be witnesses of all this extraordinary history. And as academics or budding academics, all this history and social turmoil and workplace craziness will no doubt give you plenty to research, study, and write about for years and years to come. I covered labor and workplace issues for the New York Times for 19 years. And sometimes I joke with people that covering that beat for so many years was like getting a doctorate in industrial and labor relations, and probably a lot more fun, I'm sorry. I felt fortunate that every year I got to interview hundreds of workers and professors and union leaders and corporate officials and lawmakers and lawyers of all stripes. I felt blessed that I got an inside look. In 2007, I wrote my first book, The Big Squeeze, Tough Times for the American Worker. In that book, written before the Great Recession began, I sought to shine a spotlight on a phenomenon that the nation was paying far too little attention to. While corporate profits, worker productivity, and the stock market were all climbing to record levels, American workers were being squeezed 8 ways to Sunday. Worker pay was stagnating. Health benefits were being cut at hundreds of companies. Retirement benefits were being cut. Workers are being pushed to work ever harder and be more productive. Young workers out of college were being squeezed. Many people approaching retirement age said they couldn't afford to retire. Factory workers were being squeezed by globalization. Immigrant workers were being squeezed and exploited most of all. I'm not an economist or a sociologist or a PhD in statistics, but I have eyes and I had a front row seat to see important trends. And as a journalist and writer, I felt a need to bring some important things and trends to the public's and world's attention, whether it's abysmal working and living conditions for migrant farm workers in the US, or hard sweatshop conditions in Bangladesh or Honduras, or low-wage workers whose lives are turned upside down each week because their work schedule changes usually from one week to the next. Fast forward to 2014. I was 63 years old and about to take a buyout and retire from the New York Times. My book editor asked if I had another book in me, and I told him that there was a subject I was eager to write about. I had previously written a book describing how American workers were being squeezed, were taking it on the chin. I told my editor I wanted to write a book about why American workers have been squeezed so badly, why they've gotten the short end of the stick. Again, I wanted to shine a spotlight on an important trend that I thought the nation was paying far too little attention to, a trend that, to my mind, far too few Americans understood or were talking about. And that trend was the serious decline of worker power in the United States. That decline has manifested itself in many ways. The difficulty that workers face getting their wages to keep pace with inflation, the difficulty getting any pro-worker legislation enacted in Congress and in many states, the way many news organizations have largely ignored workers. And we'll be discussing that in a panel at 3 p.m. today as part of the LERA conference. My new book is called Beaten Down, Worked Up, The Past, Present, and Future of American Labor. In this book, I explain how the decline of worker power, caused of course in part by the decline of labor unions, has fueled wage stagnation, has advanced income inequality, has tilted our politics in favor of pro-business Republicans, and even helped elect Donald Trump. To my mind, the decline of worker power has worked against sustainability. Just look at Angus Deaton's and Ann Case's seminal, usually important research on the increased deaths and reduced life expectancy of blue-collar workers in the United States. My editor, Knopf, told me that I should write the book so that it interests college students. He said it would be about a subject that not enough young Americans know about the rise of worker power and labor unions and how that built the middle class and raised living standards. I write about the great garment worker strikes of the early 20th century, the Flint sit-down strike, the great Walter Reuther, the Memphis sanitation worker strikes, all things that were extremely important in lifting workers. Then I turn to the decline of worker power in the US and how that has hurt American workers in many ways. I write about the effects of globalization, the financialization of the economy, and the focus on profit maximization. I write about the air traffic controllers' disastrous strike and how that hurt unions across the board. I write about how unions too often shot themselves in the foot. For instance, with the legacy of discrimination against women and workers of color, not all unions, but too many unions. And it's clear that things are much better now in terms of unions, accepting workers of color and women. I feel honored that Nick Kristof of the New York Times called my book superb, important, and eminently readable, a searing indictment of how labor's decline has magnified inequality and injustice in the US. When I write a book, I try to keep it readable. I try telling the story, in every chapter, I try telling a story of a few workers and try to tie that to larger trends. In my current book, the very first worker I profile is Terrence Wise, an African-American worker in Kansas City. He worked 2 full-time fast food jobs. 5 days a week, Terrence Wise left his home at 6 a.m. for an hour-long commute to his Burger King job from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Then, after another hour-long bus commute, he worked from 4 p.m. to 11 p.m. at a Pizza Hut. He often returned home after midnight. He left home each morning before his 3 daughters woke up and returned home after they had gone to sleep. Terrence Wise told me, that was the most damaging part, not being able to be around my kids, not participating in their everyday activity. His pay was so low that his family lived in a hugely underheated apartment. It was so cold, there were so many drafts in the windows that on winter nights, the 3 girls slept together on the living room couch with the oven door open and the oven on so the oven could heat the room. Wise and his family went homeless for several months when his hours at his Pizza Hut job were reduced and his wife, a home care aide, couldn't work because she hurt her back lifting a patient. I write about how Terrence Wise, angry by the unsustainable economic injustice that he faced handling 2 jobs, he became very active in the fight for 15 and actually one of the national leaders of the fight for 15. In the book, I write that worker power is so weak in the United States that there's a very unfortunate phenomenon. I call it America's anti-worker exceptionalism. The US is the only industrial nation that doesn't have national laws guaranteeing paid parental leave. Indeed, every other country in the world, except Papua New Guinea, Suriname, and a few Pacific islands, have laws guaranteeing paid maternity leave, but the United States doesn't. In contrast, European nations typically guarantee 6 weeks paid maternity leave. The US is also the only industrial nation that doesn't guarantee workers any vacation, paid or unpaid. The European Union's 27 nations guarantee workers at least 4 weeks paid vacation. France guarantees 6 weeks, Germany 5 weeks, the UK 5 weeks and 3 days. The US is also the only industrial nation other than South Korea that doesn't guarantee all workers paid sick days. While millions of Americans take paid sick days and paid vacations for granted, half the workers in the bottom 25% of earners receive neither paid sick days nor paid vacation. As all of you know, there's one more area where American workers lack a basic right. The US is the only industrial nation in the world that doesn't guarantee every worker health and family health coverage. This means we're the only industrial nation in which, if a factory with 500 workers closes, those 500 families can lose health coverage. That seems positively uncivilized to me, unsustainable, and that in the world's wealthiest nation. I submit that weak worker power has helped cause greater inequality. Among OECD countries, the US has one of the highest rates of low-wage workers, defined as workers making less than 2/3 of the median. Many of you are familiar with the research of Bruce Western and Jake Rosenfeld. They found that the decline in union power and density since 1973 explains 1/3 of the increase in wage inequality among men since then, and 1/5 of the increased inequality among women. Two economists at the International Monetary Fund, Florence Chaumont and Carolina Osorio-Buitron, found that the decline of unionization and the concomitant decline in worker bargaining power explains about half of the rise in incomes for the richest 10% in advanced industrial nations, and about half the increase in those nations' main measure of economic inequality. As worker power has declined, in many ways, things have gone backwards for workers. There's far greater use of unpaid internships. 30 and 40 years ago, unpaid internships were rare in the US. There's far, far greater use of non-compete clauses. Those used to be fairly rare 30 and 40 years ago. By some estimates, now 30% of American workers have had to sign non-competes. And as much academic research shows, those are pulling down wages. And there's far greater use of forced arbitration clauses, mandatory arbitration, than there was 10, 20, 30 years ago. Now nearly 60% of American workers have had to sign forced arbitration clauses, meaning that they cannot exercise a right to bring private legal action in courts. And corporations do far better in mandatory arbitrations against workers than they do in lawsuits. Here's one explanation for America's anti-worker exceptionalism. In the 2016 election cycle, business outspent labor 16-1, 3.4 billion to 213 million for labor. And let's look at lobbying. Each year, corporate America spends around $3 billion on lobbying in Washington. That's more than 60 times as much as the total that unions spend, 48 million. Little wonder that many lawmakers seem vastly more interested in giving $1 trillion in tax cuts to corporations when corporations were already enjoying record profits, and why so many in Congress, have no interest in raising the minimum wage, even though it hasn't been increased in more than a decade. So economic inequality has translated into political inequality. A Harris poll found that 55% of Americans support a $15 minimum wage, while another 27% support a lesser increase. That means a total of 82% want an increase in the minimum wage, while 19% want to keep the minimum wage the same or eliminate it altogether. By 80% to 17%, a New York Times CBS poll found that Americans want to require employers to provide and pay for paid leave for the parents of new children and to employees caring for sick family members. But barring a political earthquake, because of corporate America's huge power and American workers' far too weak power, there seems little chance of Congress enacting either of these measures. Everyone knows about Scott Walker's war against unions in Wisconsin, but there's one thing people don't understand. Union membership has fallen faster, at a faster rate in Wisconsin over the past decade by any other state. Union membership in Wisconsin has fallen by 44%, or 177,000 workers. Donald Trump won Wisconsin in 2016 by 22,700 votes. Unions lost 177,000. Trump won the state by 22,000. In Michigan, from 2008 to 2018, union membership there dropped by 19%, or 146,000 workers. Trump won Michigan by just 10,700 workers, lost at 146,000 union members. Trump wins Michigan by 10,700. Pennsylvania's unions have lost 182,000 members since 2008, falling by 21%. Trump won Pennsylvania by 44,000, 182,000 members lost. Trump wins by 44,000. I often wonder whether the results of the 2016 elections would have been different if union membership in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin hadn't fallen by so much. A 2018 study by James Feigenbaum of Boston University, Alexander Hertel-Fernandez at Columbia, and Vanessa Williamson at Brookings found that anti-union right-to-work laws caused the Democratic vote share to drop by 3.5% in states that passed such laws. That 3.5% drop in Democratic vote share was far more than Trump's winning margin in Michigan, 0.2%, and Trump's winning margin in Wisconsin, 0.8%. I'm sorry to say that at times my book can become rather depressing. The decline of worker power is depressing. I think it's profoundly hurt our nation, our economics, our politics, family life. But there is some good news. Good news beyond the many Americans taking to the streets right now to demand racial justice. One encouraging note, Americans are feeling far more enthusiastic about unions. I think they feel the loss, the decline of worker power. A Gallup poll released in August found that 64% of Americans approve of labor unions. That's near the highest level in the past 50 years. That's up sharply from 48% a decade ago. According to a recent MIT study, Thomas Koken, William Kimball, Chengyi Yang, and Aaron Kelly, they found that 50% of non-union, non-managerial workers say they would like to be in a union if they could. That's up sharply from 32% 2 decades ago. Another vote of confidence in unions, another statement that we need more worker power is the wave of unionization among young people. We've seen that among adjunct professors, nurses, grad students, digital media workers, workers in cannabis shops and political campaigns, museum workers, even some tech workers, like the 90 contract workers for Google who unionized in Pittsburgh, and more recently, the Kickstarter workers who unionized. Workers at the two US newspapers, long known as the nation's most anti-union papers, the LA Times and the Chicago Tribune, have unionized. And we're seeing unionized workers flex their muscles more than they have in decades, with the Red for Ed strikes in West Virginia, Oklahoma, Arizona, Los Angeles, Chicago, with the Stop and Shop grocery strike in New England, the Marriott hotel strike in San Francisco, San Jose, San Diego, Detroit, Boston, and several other cities, and with the recent, and with the GM strike more recently. We even saw 20,000 Google workers walk out to protest how that company has handled sexual harassment cases. In my chapter on the Red for Ed strikes, I quote Rebecca Gorelli, a 6th grade science teacher outside Phoenix, who is one of the dynamos behind the educator strike in Arizona. She said 50% of the win here has been that we now have a strong, organized mass movement, and we're not going away. People now have the courage to fight. We're seeing this crazy disconnect. 1 in 2 workers want to join a union, but just 1 in 16 private sector workers are in a union. As many of you know, the main reason for this is that American corporations fight tooth and nail to keep workers from forming unions. There's so many things in labor, in the workplace, for researchers, for young researchers like you to look into, to dig into. Why this crazy disconnect with so many young Americans eager to join unions and so few in unions. Another topic of research, why did so many US corporations handle COVID-19 so much worse than companies in Europe and in Asia? What will be the scarring on young people, on young workers from the pandemic and the concomitant economic collapse? In the wake of George Floyd's killing, all these companies are boasting that they support Black Lives Matter. But what is their record in hiring African Americans and hiring people of color and in promoting them to senior positions? Give me an hour and I could probably come up with 50 more research ideas. The opening epigraph in my book is from Frederick Douglass. If there's no struggle, there is no progress. Another favorite quotation of mine is from Proverbs 29:18, where there is no vision, the people perish. I've long admired academic researchers. I've long admired the hard work they do, digging out, ferreting out the truth, helping us understand the world. They help provide us with vision, and without the vision and knowledge and wisdom that they provide us, that you will provide us, the world will be worse off, and I'm sorry to say, even less sustainable than it now is. I was asked last month to video some remarks to give to Harvard Law students who are graduating this year and who had studied labor law. I'll conclude with the same last line today. I wish you much success in the years to come. I hope you remember that it's at least important to do good in the decades ahead as it is to do well. So I'll be happy to answer your questions. And again, I'm honored to be here. Sorry we can't join together and party together in Portland, and happy to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Steve. So now we'll open it up for a Q&A. Feel free to raise your hand, send me a message, anything like that to get my attention, and I'll try and go in order as best as possible. But we do have a great question from Jen to kick it off in the discussion. Jen asks, as future academics, we typically focus our writing on reaching an academic audience. Do you have any suggestions for us on how we can reach a broader audience, and any other thoughts on why this might be important?
Thanks, great question. It isn't the first time I've been asked that question, miraculously enough. And a lot of people who've been professors for 20, 30 years asked me that question. You know, I was last September when life was far saner, I spoke at the Cornell ILR school, and they asked me to do a special session talking to like 20 professors about how can they get their research and their wisdom and their quotations more into the media. So three answers. You know, if you're doing groundbreaking research that's really important, that really raises opens people's eyes, that's more likely to get attention. You know, I quoted the study by the people from Boston University, Columbia, and Brookings, saying that when states enact right-to-work laws, the Democratic vote share drops 3.5%. And both Wisconsin and Michigan had enacted right-to-work laws, and maybe without those laws, Trump would have lost those states. Like that, a study like that, gets a lot of attention. I'm sorry to say that, well-known folks in the field will generally get their research will get more attention because people pay more attention to them. But, if you really, have done something really interesting, really opened people's eyes, you should somehow try to reach out to journalists. You could tweet it out, you could put it on Facebook, and if you're more, if your colleagues in labor industrial relations think it's important, they'll retweet it, and eventually some journalists will see it. And third, I spoke, 7, 8 years ago in person to the PhD Consortium, and about 100, 150 people, and I told them a story. So there's a terrific researcher at the University of Chicago School of Social Work, Susan Lambert, and she has done the groundbreaking research on irregular, forever changing work schedules. And I had interviewed Susan. I hadn't known Susan at all like 8, 10 years ago. I'd interviewed her for a story about how workers are feeling about their job. And she said, Steve, I've done some interesting research. Can I send it to you? And she sent me some research she had done about, ever-changing work schedules, that people work Monday, Wednesday, and Friday one week, and Tuesday and Thursday, Saturday the next week, and mornings one week, and evenings the next week. And her study showed this creates hell for workers, and it messes up the lives, makes it hard to schedule childcare. It makes their kids unhappier. Their kids do worse in school. And I thought, wow, look at this dry academic study, but it really opened my eyes. And I did a huge story, one-page story for the New York Times about the baleful, the unfortunate effects of ever-changing schedules. And this woman, Carrie Gleason, who ran the Retail Workers Action Project, she saw this story and she started this whole Fair Work Week movement. And I wrote many more stories about it. Other journalists picked up about it. And really, it's because of the research by this one, soft-spoken, quiet professor at the University of Chicago School of Social Work that in ways this whole movement around the nation has really gathered steam. And I raised that, like, if you do important research, that really discusses what's happening, it can really be picked up and can really turn into a movement. And that's what happens with Susan's research. And I was just the messenger who helped spread the word about the important research that she did.
All right, we have another really important question from Greg in the chat, asking, do you have any thoughts about Trump's support among white male union members?
Oh, I could go on for an hour, Greg. So as I often say, and when I was at the New York Times, there's a good, I say, neutral, neutered journalist. I kept my opinions out, but I'm also a New Yorker, and I've followed the Donald Trump phenomenon for 30 years. And I remember when he would make believe he was his own PR guy, and he's an amazing con man and liar. And I've done this for 30 years, and why doesn't everyone else see this? And so he would go to, Indiana and Ohio and Wisconsin and Michigan, Pennsylvania, and say, I'm the worker's best friend. I'll bring all the jobs back. No factory will close on my watch. And it's a total crock of shit, pardon my French. It's just amazing that people would believe this stuff. It's like, Trump says he loves the uneducated. Yes, he loves them because they're probably, they'll accept what he has to say. So I think, a lot of, one of my longtime critiques of the Obama administration was it didn't pay enough attention to the hurting blue-collar communities in the Midwest. I'm not the only one who said that. Many others have said that. And then Hillary was torn. She didn't want to say things were really bad in these blue-collar communities in the Midwest because that would look as if she was dissing Obama. So she kind of made believe that everything was kind of okay for workers, and that created an opening for Trump. And Trump promised to be American workers' best friend, and that was a lie. That was a total con. And I've written many articles about the 83 different ways Trump has screwed workers, taking away overtime from millions of workers. So many of his appointees have sought to weaken unions. And if you're serious about wanting to help workers, it's important to give them a voice. And if you take these steps if your administration takes steps to weaken workers' voice, to silence them, his judges have upheld bans on class actions. So I think a lot of workers, whether white male or white female or African American or Asian American or Latino American, Latinx American, are going to see that Trump has not delivered to workers. Yes, he's made a lot of noise about improving trade agreements, but in effect, he really has accomplished very little on trade. I would argue that what he's done with China has in many ways made things worse for American workers, for Chinese workers, but he's made a lot of noise and he's fooled a lot of people into thinking that he's delivered for them. And I argue that the pandemic is much worse than it would be if we had a competent person in the White House, that the economic collapse is much worse than it need have been. You look at how workers have been hurt far, far less in Europe than in the US. And this is important for academics to talk about, for journalists to write about. I just think Trump, the greatest con man in world history. And I think he's fooled a lot of workers. Was that opinionated enough?
We got a couple more questions here in the chat. One is a quick follow-up to the first question. You gave a couple hints in terms of academics getting the attention of journalists. But Allison wants to know if there's a magic formula for reaching out to journalists like you. So any insight you may have on that.
So Josh Adelson won an award, from Bloomberg Business Week, won an award, this year's journalism award. And he's a terrific journalist. But when I was at the New York Times, Noam Schreiber, my successor at the New York Times, Margaret Roosevelt, who covers the economy, workplace matters for the LA Times. Lauren Carey Gurley at Fox, who at Vice has done a great job covering labor. Everyone's overwhelmed. I mean, there are like always 6 or 8 stories to write it at any time. And you could try to get the email addresses and email and say, I have something, I've done some important research, this might be worth writing about. But you're competing against Uber and Lyft drivers protesting, McDonald's workers walking out, Amazon workers walking out. So it ain't easy. Now, hopefully in 15 years, you all have tenure and will be highly respected tenured professors. And when journalists say, well, I need an excellent professor to speak to at Rutgers or Cornell or Berkeley or University of Illinois, University of Michigan, they'll call you, they'll know your name. But for younger people just starting out, it ain't easy. But put your nose to the grindstone, do good research, try to, speak, get well known, try to get some email addresses of various journalists and develop friendships with them. And that might help.
Thanks so much.
Great. And Johnny asks, in regard to the current crisis, he notes that in past crises have sometimes led to organizing growth in labor activism, such in the 1930s, but sometimes have not, such as in the 2008 recession. Do you have any thoughts on whether this crisis, especially with the public health crisis and racial justice activism against police killings, will lead to a resurgence in organizing?
Just one more thought about the previous answer. So it's also good to try to write op-eds. That that's not easy to do, but it helps get your name out there into the public forum. And once when you become known as an expert on discrimination against African American workers or Asian American workers or how badly farm workers are treated, then when people are writing about that, they'll say, "Hey, I remember that Susan wrote this op-ed. I'll contact her." So. I did this big piece of American Prospect about, what the current crises will mean for the future of organizing. On one hand, we have COVID-19, which makes it very hard to meet. When you try to unionize people, it's important to talk face-to-face. It's important to have large meetings. So on one hand, that will make it harder. On the other hand, I think a lot of people, it's amazing that we saw these walkouts at Amazon and Instacart and McDonald's in the middle of a pandemic when you're so scared. But it shows that people kind of rip the mask off, so to speak, of how badly so many American corporations treat their workers. And this is just a few months after the Business Roundtable said, we are changing our ways. We're no longer going to be obsessed with profit maximization. We're no longer going to focus only on our shareholders. We're going to work to focus on all stakeholders, including workers. So I think workers are extremely angry, and I think a lot of them would want to organize, but it's very hard. The playing field, and I explain this at length in my book, is tilted so hugely in favor of corporations and against workers when they try to organize. So many corporations fire the rank and file workers who lead unionization drives. So many use spies, in the union committee. So many interrogate workers and hold one-on-one meetings and hire anti-union. So it's hard. Now the these huge and amazing and inspiring protests in now 1,000 cities, for Black Lives Matter, racial justice. I'm not sure how that will play out for workplace organizing. I've talked to so many union leaders over the years, and they say, "Oh, Americans are lazy. They're apathetic. They just sit on their ass and play video games and watch TV." And like, no, I mean that's false. I mean, you give Americans a cause, whether it's Black Lives Matter or climate, or students being shot in their schools, or the environment, or the Me Too movement, and the women's movement, or now the Black Lives Matter, George Floyd. Americans are willing to stand up and speak up, and I think labor has to do better in mobilizing people and getting. I think a lot of American workers don't understand how bad they have it compared to workers in other nations. I've given a lot of talks, and I say to a lot of people, what I said to you, that we're the only nation that doesn't have a law guaranteeing paid vacation, the only nation not guaranteeing, only industrial nation not guaranteeing paid parental leave, paid family leave, not having paid sick days, not having universal health coverage. And people say, really? I thought Donald Trump had made America great again. What are you talking about? So I think, just unions, I think, have to do more public education. And I use that quote, where there's no vision, the people perish. Where there's no understanding of what's going on in the world, and that's a lot of what you're supposed to do and I'm supposed to do. We share that. Not that people perish, but like people settle for much less in their lives, a much less sustainable situation than they should.
All right, I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you, Steve. Really glad that we were able to start a little bit early and have some more time for discussion. I'd please join me in thanking Steve one more time for being here and for his great talk. It was really great having you. We'll be taking a quick break for about 10 minutes, and then we'll be joining back here at 12:25 for our Young Scholar panel. So thank you, Steve.
Thanks very much. Be well, everyone.
And we'll see everybody in about 9-10 minutes.
Okay, I think we'll get started. Do we have all the panelists here? Christine, Greg, Michael, Saehee, Sean. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Jake. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Yehi, one of the co-organizers of the consortium, and I'm very excited to have our panelists here today. Many doctoral students, including myself, share similar interests and concerns like job market and work-life balance. So I think it's really great that we have these wonderful young scholars who can share insights and experiences on this specifically. So we've prepared a few questions that would be of interest to many doctoral students for the panel, but after then we'll open it up for questions and discussions. So please feel free to just raise your hands and ask questions directly to our panelists, or type down your questions in the chat box if you prefer. So let me just start by briefly introducing our panelists. Kristen Riordan received her PhD from the MIT Sloan School of Management in 2019. She's currently an assistant professor at the University of Illinois School of Labor and Employment Relations. Greg Distelhorst received his PhD in political science from MIT in 2013. He's currently an assistant professor at the University of Toronto, the Center for Industrial Relations and Human Resources, and the Rutgers School of Management. Michael Maffie received his PhD from Cornell in 2018. He's currently an assistant professor in labor and employment relations at Penn State University. Saehee Kang received his PhD in 2019 from Rutgers University, the School of Management and Labor Relations. He's currently an assistant professor of management at the Marquette University. Sean O'Brady received his PhD in Industrial Relations from the Université de Montréal in 2018, and he's currently an assistant professor at the De Groot School of Business, McMaster University. So welcome all. I would like to just start off by asking our panelists on their life as a PhD student. Just want to start by asking, what were some main challenges you have faced as a PhD student and how you have overcome them? I think we'll go through and hear from each of our panelists, and I think in the order of their alphabetical order of their first name would work. I think that's how it's showing up in the Zoom. So yeah, Christine, if you could start.
Hey, well, first, thanks so much for having me. I was kind of sad to miss the consortium, and so I'm really glad to be here because I thought it was always a highlight of LERA for me. And so I really appreciate the chance to chat and to see all of you. I think when I think about the PhD program, you know, I feel like the main challenge that I think about, there are academic challenges, but then there were also just kind of work-life challenges in terms of thinking about, you know, balancing your work and personal life, trying to think about and address imposter syndrome and kind of those types of doubts that can accompany the PhD. And so I feel like that was one challenge that I've been thinking about a lot when I was looking at the questions for this panel, because it can be hard to kind of find that balance. It can often take a lot of work to find that balance and a lot of effort. And so thinking about the kind of challenges as a PhD student and how I overcame them, I think the challenge was really just finding the right way to kind of reach that balance in work and personal life, making a conscious decision to address it and to put in that work and effort, and really overcoming those kind of moments of self-doubt through a very strong social network, which some of my fellow IRA PhDs are in this session, but I really relied on them, and we all relied on one another to kind of help each other out, to keep each other sane and happy. And so really emphasizing that social aspect was huge for me in that PhD program.
Awesome, thank you. Greg, if you could share your views, that would be great.
Yeah, nice to see everyone at this. The thing I wanted to share in response to this question was that I really didn't enjoy graduate school much at all. I found it to be a very stressful time in my life, a time of great insecurity and uncertainty, and almost, for me at least, like paralyzing level of freedom over, you know, what my PhD was about and how to control that. So I had a really unpleasant, it's sort of like high school, like a lot of growth happened in that period. At the same time, like I have no desire whatsoever to go back to that. I wanted to mention that because my own advisors would often talk wistfully about their PhD experiences. They're like, oh, if only we could be PhD students again. And I had this like sinking feeling like, if I'm this unhappy right now, how awful will being a faculty member be in the future? And I found that that wasn't the case. The thing that really helped me get going, I mean, a few things. I really love what Christine said about work-life balance and finding support systems, and that's really important. And when I found I needed to be completely like escapist from grad school, I would throw myself into other, like trying to run marathons or do other kinds of completely irrelevant non-mental activities. But the thing that really helped me get cooking in grad school was where I kind of figured out that my own motivations for doing research weren't exactly the same as my PhD colleagues. Like people are motivated by different things. Some people find the discipline they're in very motivating and engaging and stimulating for them. And that just didn't work as well for me. And I really needed to feel like I had a kind of connection to some social mission or issue that I cared about, in addition to, you know, an opportunity to do that research and doing it using the methods that I like to use and all those things. And so really acknowledging that it was okay to have a kind of a different set of motivations for why you do the PhD and trying to like design your studies around that was really helpful for me.
Awesome, thank you. Michael, would you like to share your experience? Thank you.
No, thank you all for having me here today. It's really good to be part of this. You know, I think of two main challenges that I experienced, and I think it's important to lift up that people will go through different things in the PhD. It's a varied process. People will have challenges at different points. So the two that that most directly resonated with me was, first was finding a dissertation topic. Because I found myself about 2.5 years in having researched class action litigation against Fortune 1000 companies. And there was no way that I was going to stare at more pacer sheets for the next 3 years trying to code those. And so, there was sort of this moment of the clock is ticking, I need to graduate at some point, or I need to go off and get a job, but I don't really know what I want to study. And that was sort of the formative moment when I had to ask myself, like, what interests me? What are the things that I wanted to spend, a very long period of time thinking about? And part of what helped with that was being connected outside of my department. I played tennis with some economists. I lived with PhD students in communication and information science. And so both talking about the things that motivated them in their research, they were a little bit further ahead of me in their PhD programs. And also what the methods were like in their departments. It really helped me think about what were the things that I wanted to spend a lot of time thinking about. And that's sort of when I transitioned over to gig economy platforms and started to dig into that. And so one of the things that, I think if anybody's going through this, I like to think about the process of finding a topic as a little bit like the sorting hat in Harry Potter, right? Like it eventually will find you in that, and it'll eventually match up, like trust in some of the process. As long as you're, you have a good network, you're in contact with what's interested in you, like there will be a match. And the second one I want to lift up a little bit what Christine said about imposter syndrome. And what's kind of interesting is that you said, how do you overcome this? Well, I mean, that's something that I'm not really sure that I ever overcame. It's something that's still around, right? I was just on a run the other day thinking like, hey, well, I just published an article, like, will I ever be able to do this again, right? And so I think that having a good network of colleagues in the field, people who are a little bit ahead of you, having connections with your advisor, like these are the things that can help remind you that you're making progress, even when it doesn't seem like you're moving forward.
Thank you, and I love the Harry Potter metaphor. I think it's uplifting for many of us. Thank you. Saehee, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for having me and inviting me, and good to see you all. In retrospective, I think my PhD was stressful because our work is endless. Many people says that researchers are autonomous, but actually our work is endless. So even when I watch TV show on Netflix, I sometimes think about, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that. So I think it's really important to draw a clear line between your professional life and your personal life, because your mental health and family support are really, really important to be productive at work. So I'm still struggling, but I think this is really important to draw a clear line between your work and work life and personal life, especially during these days when many of us work from home. So yeah, I want to say that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Last but not least, Qian.
Sure, yeah. So first of all, it's actually nice to hear, the views of the other people on this panel, to know I'm not alone, that, that I'm not the only one. Imposter syndrome, the stress associated with all of this. For me, a lot of parts were a nightmare. But for me, it was actually kind of crazy too, because, some of you actually are probably dealing with this as well. I went to a program which wasn't my first language. So I went to Université de Montréal. It's a Francophone university. I'm an Anglophone, so I had to pick up the language as I went through it. I could write my thesis in English, but the coursework was in French. All the presentations were in French, all of that stuff. So that was a big hurdle. And there are ways to get out of that, but you really have an appreciation for people who have to do it, work in their second language, what they have to do. And I'm lucky in the sense that, I can write in English, and English is the language of academia, the Francophones in my program who try to get their stuff into it. Yeah, and then on top of that, my wife and I kept having kids. So we ended up, I had pregnant my wife twice during it. So for me, it was just lack of sleep, constant exhaustion. And the only way I found to get through it, which speaks to the person whose name, Saehee, right? That's it, Saehee?
Correct.
I had to, in order for me to finish, I had to come up with a regimen. That was the only way to do it. Or else I was just spending many unproductive hours. Because if you do 12 hours every day, you're not going to get anywhere, to be honest. You're just going to have a fuzzy mind. You're not going to finish it. And actually having kids, even though it cut my sleep in half, it made me have a regimen. In the sense, when you have kids, you know, I had to stop for dinner and I wouldn't do anything until I put the kids to bed after. So there was about a good 4 hours where I wouldn't think about work and I just think about feeding them in the evenings. And then in the morning, there'd be another hour or two. And then I had to sleep to be able to adapt to that. And I felt having kids actually boosted my productivity, even though it was a big transition. But yeah, what were the big issues for me? It was just juggling all this stuff at the same time. And then I had data access issues. Yeah. And how did I overcome them? Come up with a regimen and just keep at it. And know that every day at the end of the day, try to have some form of output. You know, I hear some people say, have a paragraph a day. And then once you get that paragraph a day, you know, or if you read 2 or 3 articles in a day, you've done something. Then you could sleep and then think about other things and be more productive for the next day. That's it.
That's an awesome strategy. Thank you for sharing. So we would also like to ask for your experience, a job market experience. What tips would you give to those who will soon be on the market? And would there be any important skills to have to be a strong candidate? And in hindsight, would you do anything differently?
So I can start off, and I have to echo Sean's comments about actually feeling a little relieved hearing the other panelists and your perspectives. So I feel like I can kind of be a little more forthcoming. The job market for me was, you know, to echo Greg's point about having different motivations, I had really missed in my PhD. I came out of organized labor and I worked for labor advocacy nonprofits for quite a while before doing my degree. And I really missed that part of my life. And so the job market, I was really trying to focus on, you know, looking at labor schools or public policy schools. I did my PhD in a business school because I was motivated by that. And at times it kind of put me at odds with my cohort of students that were going out and searching for very different kinds of jobs, which was, it felt a little isolating. And that's something that kind of, I don't know, it was a point of, or an emotion that I felt throughout my time in my PhD, but it kind of came to light there. And, but that being said, I think, you know, when I think back to, I mean, I got very lucky in terms of winding up at LER, where I really feel like it's been a perfect fit. It's hard to navigate because you just don't know what's going to happen, right? It's a very uncertain process no matter what. And the one tip that I think is helpful is to constantly tell yourself you don't really know what's going on in decisions, right? It may not be about you. It's so easy to think like we just spent 5, 6, 7 years putting together this dissertation, we're putting ourselves out there. And if we don't get called for a talk, if we don't get an offer, whatever it is, it's so easy to interpret that as something about ourselves. And so I one very good friend who was in a different program who was, you know, had trouble her first time around and was saying, you know, does this mean I'm a failure and no one likes me? And that's the path that we have to avoid. And so taking an outsider's perspective throughout the whole process from the beginning is I just found it to be extremely helpful. Kind of just telling yourself repeatedly that you don't really know what's going on. It's not about kind of not letting it reflect or a judgment on ourselves. I think that was the challenge for me and what I tell friends and our PhDs going out in the market now. It's just, there's so much about the process you don't know. So I'll leave it there to hear what others have to say.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, Christine, that's such good advice. Yeah, it turns out, you know, once you sit on some search committees, you realize how rarely determinative factors are actually about the candidate as opposed to so many other things that can happen in that process. Everything from thinking you might not invite somebody to a talk because they'll be like too popular with other schools and maybe you wouldn't get them, to like the current composition of the department. I don't know. I made a lot of those assumptions when I was on the market. I'm now looking back, I think those were all wrong. I think, on the bright side of the job market, like 80 or 90% of the work that goes into looking for a job, you've already done, by that stage in your graduate career, because essentially, people want to hire colleagues who are going to do, research that's of good quality, and then to be able to communicate that through, the academic publishing process that we're all more or less judged by. And so to the extent that you've been working on building up those two capabilities as a grad student, that's all in your pocket by the time you get into the job season. I think the challenge is that the last 20%, which is about communicating your research in presentations, and then also engaging productively when people ask you questions and challenge you about that research, is pretty undertrained. At least we didn't get a lot of training in that, and I wasn't consciously thinking about developing those capabilities. I had very, very unsuccessful job market experiences for the first 3 years that I was on the market. So if you ever want to hear I have a lot of sort of humorously framed stories of failure, if that makes you feel better sometime. But I think going when you're thinking about preparing for that job market in the fall or the winter, really subjecting yourself to kind of like a gauntlet of presenting to people and listening to feedback and reflecting on what makes somebody an effective communicator when standing in front of a classroom is really where you want to focus your energy. And then second, on engaging with audiences, you have to do this sort of double thing where you're both respectful of the questioner but also assertive about your research, because professors are authority figures. And you have to both respect them, but then also make a sort of positive statement about what you believe and what you see in your research. And so I think that those are skills that you can build up by practicing them. It can be kind of painful to do it, but you should just rush into that and sort of over prepare for that, because most of what you've done prior to this moment didn't really prepare us for this kind of stuff.
Thank you so much for great tips. Michael, do you have anything you'd like to share?
I wanted to emphasize those 2 points are so important. That it's not about you, and absolutely give as many presentations as possible to different audiences. I remember right before I gave my job talk, I did a talk in front of some of the faculty from different departments, and one of my close friends in the department, one of my mentors, came up to me afterwards and said, "That's a good example of a job talk that goes off the rails," right? And so you're going to have these instances, but it's good to get that feedback from people in different areas. And so the other thing that I think is important that I want to try to have a positive message here is coming to talks like this, coming to LERA, meeting people in the field, following up with people after LERA, saying, "Hey, I was at your presentation. I have this question about your paper." Growing your network so people know sort of who you are and what your research is, and how people think about research questions. I think that's a good thing to get in the habit of doing. And just by coming to presentations like these, coming to LERA, you're moving forward in your job market. You started it already, and so you're moving forward.
That's amazing. Thank you. So I'll turn it over to Saehee.
Yes, it's a little awkward because I think I didn't do very well on my job market, but based on my experience, I think I can provide some suggestions for the people who will be on the job market. So the first thing I want to mention is that consult with as many people as possible. This is because people have different views and experience, and individuals have different career goals. So people tend to provide suggestions or give advice based on their own view or based on their own experience. So you may want to talk to with many people, okay, so that you can so you need to basically do a meta-analysis so that what's the general norm so in the job market, and then you may want to figure out what is the right strategy for you. And then the second one is that it's related to the things that other people already mentioned, but you have to focus on what you can do. Okay, it'll be really stressful if you focus on what you cannot control. So, for example, if you will be on the job market this year, you may want to focus on your dissertation and job talk and other the job market process as well. And if you will go on the job market next year or so, you may want to submit your working papers to journals as soon as possible so that you can make your CV better. And you may want to teach some classes if you have a teaching opportunity. And in all your doctoral program, you may want to participate in like conferences like this. So you are already doing a good job. And next one is, the next one I want to point out is that, okay, practice, practice, and practice, and practice. That's all, okay? I think in my case, I think I didn't do very well in answering unexpected questions in my job talks and during the personal interview. So you may want to not only practice your job talk itself, but also how to answer to some unique questions you might not expect it. So you have to be prepared to answer to those questions smartly. Okay? So that's very important. And of course, definitely you have to study about the school, department, and faculty, because it'll help you to ask good questions, right? Asking good questions are really important. And if you study a lot about the university and department, you will come up with good questions. So that is really important to prepare your job market process. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I'll turn it over to Sean.
Sure, yeah, so I echo what everybody is saying. Some interesting things out there. I'm sure it's a bad time when you're on the job market. Let's just say it's very stressful. It's very emotional. It's kind of like, you know, trying to date. It's like you're trying to say, you know, you want to go on a date with me? And then people are rejecting you. Some people are not calling you back. So it's, you know, and so Christine was saying the uncertainty of it all can wreak havoc. So to answer that question, you know, I had the same experience as everyone else. What are some things you can do? Well, first of all, I would say never presume for a department when it comes to applying. If there's a place where you could see that you could be interested in working there and you could fit in some way, I think there's no harm in applying there. And it never assume. Sometimes, you know, a department will hire 3 people who are completely different than you. So you'll say, well, they're not hiring what I am. But they might decide internally, well, we just hired a whole bunch of people like that. We want something different, right? When I got chosen, I didn't think I was going to get, the places I got invited to job talks were all surprises for me. The place I got, you know, somebody picked up in social entrepreneurship, like that I was like a lefty who studied unions in Sweden, right? And he wasn't even related to my field, and he was one of my biggest champions. So you never know what people on the hiring committee will see in your profile. It's very serendipitous. So just apply if you're interested in working there. One thing I'll say though, is it could be useful to do research on what institutions you'd like to work at some point, so that you can kind of hit lines of your CV that might matter. So for example, business schools have lists, right? So if there are certain business schools in certain countries that you want to work at, you know, it makes sense to check out that list. The UK has a list, the Australians have a list. In Canada, they use a lot of the Australian lists sometimes. They create their own lists. Some of them use FT50s. You know, if you go to ILR school, if you're not thinking business schools, ILR school loves ILR Review, Industrial Relations, a Journal of Economy and Society. So, and it's just, I'm not saying to gear your research to assimilate to the lists, because you have to be true to yourself. But, you know, when you're thinking about journal choices and places you want to work, it could be good, could be informative to know, you know, how these figure. A small point in networking visibility, I agree with that completely. I have this argument, maybe I'm the only one that thinks this, about overexposure. So candidates are kind of like you when you want to go to see a movie. You know, the trailer is great if it entices you. If the trailer shows you half the movie, you're less intrigued. So like you want people to know you, to think you're doing work, but you want to keep a bit of mystery, because when people know a lot about you, too much about you, I feel like at that point you become a little less attractive because they know everything. But that's just my own view. That's my own theory. I have no evidence to back that up. Fourth thing, keep your guard up a little bit. I would say it's kind of like a Hobbesian universe out there. Once people are on the job market, some people behave in very different ways. You know, call peers in your school. They can get, you know, it gets a little competitive. These are jobs for life, right? So it's just when some people are asking you questions, just to be mindful of that. And, you know, just understand that that's the name of the game. Don't get offended by it. Don't take things personally when people get like a little bit, they're hiding knowledge or whatever. It's to be expected. So there's a personal level in the sense that you're getting these weird dynamics of departments not calling you back or not hired after the job talk. And there's also with your peers. And just know this is just, everybody goes through this experience. It's nothing personal to you. 5, get some rest and stay sane. If you get invited to a job talk, sleep, prepare like hell so you have all the right questions, but make sure you sleep the few nights before so that you can actually answer them and be coherent. And last thing, Saehee was talking a little bit about tricks for the job talk, and there are a few things quick things that I thought were useful. When you have these faculty meetings, sometimes you have one-on-one meetings. The trick is not to just go off talking. The trick is to just ask questions unless follow their cues. If they start talking and asking you things, just follow their lead. If not, ask them questions either about their research or about the institution, because you would have done research and programs, things like that, and focus it all on asking questions. Don't treat it like a job interview, like you're in a company. It's very different. That some people get put off. And also one last thing, there's a dinner. A lot of the times there's a dinner. You know, that's not even like interviewish. It's just don't be obnoxious and follow their lead again. Okay, that's it for me.
Awesome, thank you so much. Some of you mentioned about the fact that we do not have a full control over the job market, but we cannot help wondering how the recent pandemic would affect the job market situation. And I would like to just ask on behalf of other PhD students on your views as a professor or even like a selection committee member, how the pandemic may impact students' experience on the job market.
I feel a little kind of not having been on the other side for very long. I'm actually not entirely certain how to answer that. So maybe others have some insight. I'm not on a kind of committees. LER is not hiring, so I'm not really sure. The one thing I will say though is that I just know from talking with folks and looking around at what's going on at the university, you know, if there are things that you need or others in your cohort need as you're thinking about going on the job market in terms of resources from faculty, resources from the school. I just encourage everyone to be vocal about it, because to the extent you feel comfortable doing so, because there is just, I think a lot of people just don't really know kind of really what next year is going to look like. If you have a graduate student union, I advocate turning to them. At UIUC, we have the graduate student union has been really active in surveying students, figuring out what people need, trying to get them support, that kind of stuff. But I'll let maybe others have more thoughts on kind of the specifics of what things will look like there.
Yeah, I don't know much about specifics. I think our unit is hiring again next year, but other than that, I don't really have another sort of set of insights about this. So keep an eye out for our ad, by the way.
I'll just echo the uncertainty. Yeah, I've heard contradictory things from different schools. Some are saying they might try to jump into the job market because they feel it's an opportunity to hire candidates that they otherwise wouldn't be able to hire. Others are saying that they're not going to have openings. I know our school, our dean asked for a wish list and we haven't heard back from them. But I want to echo the comments that I feel like grad students should be open with their committee and their advisors about what they need, about their director of graduate study, that if they need extended funding or additional teaching opportunities, these are going to be things that they should ask for to ensure that you can go on the market in the future. Ultimately, I think that everybody wants to make sure that there's a strong and vibrant field and that there isn't one cohort that's disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And so being active about this is going to be important, and that can be scary as a grad student, right? And that can be something that speaking up can be difficult. Having conversations internal to your grad cohort, trying to find where everybody is at. These things can all be very helpful. before going forward and talking to professors. But understand, like we would like to do the best to try to help you in these situations. But sometimes we face institutional constraints. But the first step is asking.
Thank you. So Saehee or Sean, if you have anything add to that, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, definitely there is uncertainty, but I think now, honestly, I think it's not the best time to. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But I think it's a good idea to prepare, think about all the options you can choose. I mean, of course, it'll be great if you can get your dream job, but you can think about other options as well if you can do. So I think I don't know. I don't know what will be happen because the stock market seems quite good these days, unexpectedly. So who knows? I don't know.
Okay. So yeah, I think it's safe to say that it's really uncertain situation for all of us. And we had a couple of more questions to ask for our panelists, but I see that in the chat box, people are uploading, texting in their questions, and we want to keep as much time as possible for the participants also. So I'm just gonna start reading out the questions. So the first question that I see here is from Jen. Is there anything you would have done differently during your PhD? And feel free to just interact directly with our panelists if you want. You can just unmute yourself.
Do you want us to go around with all of those, or maybe?
Yeah, or you can just, if you have specifically something specific to add, then feel free to answer the question.
So on the PhD, what I would do differently, I felt a little disoriented in the beginning, having come from where I was and then going into a business school and having these different set of interests and motivations. And so to Michael's point earlier, it took a while to figure out like my topic and where I fit and everything. And it got a lot easier once I actually stopped worrying about that as much. So that's just one thought, because I felt like in the beginning, was just I just felt very disoriented and a little confused about where I was going and that kind of thing. And there was a question on here also about if it's appropriate to reach out to faculty to the schools you're applying to. I definitely did that. I mean, I drew on the network of people I knew from my program, alums, friends I had in other places. I didn't talk to higher ups, but I did talk to who are kind of more my peers, asking them about what they were looking for. I also went to my advisors because they often had more insight into especially similar schools. So they gave good advice as well.
If anybody else wants to add to the questions, whether it's appropriate to reach out to the faculty or dean or director, feel free to jump in.
I put my reply in the chat. I think it's a good thing that can come out of LERA that you can just sort of ask people that more casually. I know that like if I'm writing an email to somebody about a job search, I actually have to think about what I would be allowed to say in any kind of like official capacity about it. We're a public institution, our job ads go through all these layers of review for like various discrimination reasons and stuff like that. So you might get less out of those sort of an email to somebody because they might have to think through how they reply to that. On the other hand, if you're at one of these like conference ballrooms, you might hear something more useful or hear more casually, here's what we're thinking about. But again, I haven't found that to be especially I have never found that to be at all helpful in my job search stuff. I found it to be helpful to just like do kind of what you do well, and then and present that in a cover letter that shows that you've thought a little bit about how that might fit into the school, and then just try not to think about it for the next 10 weeks while you wait to probably hear nothing from them.
Thank you so much. We have another question from Jenna. This was actually one of the questions that we haven't covered. So she's asking what was the aspect of transitioning from student to faculty that was most surprising to you?
So I can start really quick. The transition for me was, I mean, I still feel like I'm in the transition, and it's been a crazy year to kind of kick off teaching and everything. But my first semester, I did spend a lot of time. I mean, it's just very hard to really get a lot done in a concrete way because you're prepping, you're figuring out where you are, how to manage classrooms, all these other things. And that definitely got easier. The second time, in my second semester, I was lucky enough to teach the same class, but it all kind of got lots of upheaval, as we all know, with the kind of transition to online classes and stuff like that. But I will say the one thing I did that was very helpful for me in the beginning was I sat down with a couple of faculty members and with our dean. And as I was talking to them about kind of tenure expectations, I also just asked them, like, what does a first year look like? What do you want to see in the first year, or a good first year? So that I had a more kind of near-term set of benchmarks to work towards, as opposed to just thinking about what I have to have done in 5 years and feeling panicky. So that was very helpful. And the thing that was surprising to me was that I found, Greg mentioned earlier, feeling almost paralyzed by how much freedom you have. And that actually was what came up for me in the beginning. Just kind of thinking about what's next and what am I going to do. And so the thing that helped me very much there is just starting up collaborations. And so I now have 3 different things going with different people and kind of colleagues at other universities. And that's been super, super helpful and has made me extremely excited about the work that I'm doing.
Awesome, thank you. If other panelists have anything to add to Kristen's point.
One thing that is like a kind of funny change is it makes you reflect on like status and structural differences, because I found that as a grad student, like the assumption is like, well, you're probably very naive and you don't know anything. Then you'll say the exact same idea, but with a professor in front of your name, and people will be like, profound, like so profound. Like they'll just instantly defer to you on these things, which is quite, actually quite dangerous, especially, I don't know, I think a lot of people attracted to academia do want to think of themselves as authorities. And you can sort of get a big head, I think, very quickly when you are suddenly kind of christened with this new title. But the other thing, I mean, this goes back to something that Saehee was saying earlier too. I find that that idea of like splitting up the work follows you home, because we don't have like a lab with like $1 million equipment where our work happens. Our work, we could go rip off like a whole work week immediately after this meeting and not sleep, just like sitting in this one chair. So it follows you home a lot. And so this is like a later question that I don't know if we'll get to in the discussion, but it was about how to do that work-life balance thing. I didn't keep a calendar, and this also goes back to Jen, your question about what to do differently in grad school. I didn't keep a calendar for like the longest time in my life. And I found that now that I'm in my like actual job, that's totally untenable, at least if I want to ever have periods of time where I know I don't have to be thinking about work. I can do some other thing that's currently on my calendar, because that thing I have to do at work is on the calendar for tomorrow morning starting at 8:30 a.m. And I know I don't have to think about it at like 8:45 p.m. the night before, because I have no real commitment about when my work is happening and then when like exercise or socializing or these other things are happening. So I've found that a lot to be helpful.
Thank you.
Just to pick up a little bit what Greg said, when I was about to start being in a faculty position, I reached out to one of my friends who had gone on in another field, and I asked him, what should I expect? And the blocks of time thing is real. And he said that in grad school, you have big blocks of time the last few years as you're finishing your PhD. And so in terms of Mario Kart, You can be Bowser, right? You can start off slow and you can hit a really high speed and go for a long period of time. When you're a faculty member, you have to be Toad, right? You have 15-minute blocks in between a student who's coming in to talk about their grade, between a faculty meeting. And so you have to learn to work a little bit differently. And I want to be encouraging that it does get better because you get better at this game, right? It becomes easier to work in 15-minute blocks. You're able to control things a little bit better. Like, this is something I'm now finishing my second year. And so like the first year I felt like I was totally drowning. Like I had no time. I was trying to figure out all these things, right? Like just as soon as you start to think your classes are getting in order, you're like, oh man, I need to go to the dentist. Like, where's the dentist in State College? And like, there's all these things that you don't think about when you're moving to a new place, you get uprooted from your community. And one of the most important interactions I had was when I was playing tennis with a department head from another department at Penn State. And they said, do you schedule time for yourself? And I said, well, what do you mean? Right? And they're like, no, you need to schedule time for yourselves, because if you don't, this job will just eat you alive. And so it's important to create that balance. I think that other panelists might want to step in and talk a little bit about that. But that was sort of my experience. Was the first year was not the easiest transition, but hopefully it gets better.
Yeah, so I had a similar experience to everyone. They're talking about, Michael was talking about blocks of time, right, being eliminated. And I think it was Greg was saying how people treat you differently as soon as you have the name professor. I was a postdoc before. I had tons of time to think about research, but that's all I would do that. And I worked with a few people close to me, but nobody else really cared to, about what I was doing. You're kind of like autonomous, like a grad student plus. And then the minute I became an assistant professor, everybody's asking me for something, to collaborate, to participate in something. And all of a sudden your email inbox is like going tick, 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 tick. And so basically one thing you have to prepare is there's the load of people asking you for stuff, your course prep, all of that. And you also don't know what's going on. So when you're in an academic environment and you start off as a position, I don't know about everybody else's experience, but the chair's another academic who's trying to publish. Your colleagues, we're research intensive, they're all trying to publish. And you're going to have a lot of questions, right? You're going to have, and there's going to be lack of clarity. People are going to send you an email. You won't know if it means that you have a responsibility attached with that. And so you're going to have to ask lots of questions, and don't be shy about it. Everybody knows you're new. It's just kind of how it is. But yeah, so be prepared to have your time eaten up. And my advice wouldn't be much different than what Michael's suggesting. You have to carve out time for yourself, and you have to carve out time for your research. So you have to have moments where you put your computer away, you close your email inbox, and you're just reading and writing. Because, well, at least for tenure, that's what's going to matter down the road. And you have a tenure cycle. Sure, you're in your first year, but it could take 3 years to publish some articles, right? So if you have time to get something in earlier rather than later, it can make things less stressful later. And yeah, that's all I have to say. I'm gonna guess.
Awesome, thank you so much. Are there any? Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No problem. I basically agree with all of the comments from other panels. And obviously there is some differences between the PhD students and faculties. But when it comes to the type of work you do, there is no big difference. So basically research and teaching, right? So if you keep doing what you are currently doing, then I'm quite sure that the transition from student to faculty will not be too difficult.
Awesome, thank you so much. Are there any questions from our participants? If you have, you can raise your hand or go ahead and unmute yourself and speak to the panelists. So I think we have covered most of the questions that people.
I think Ellie might be trying to get in there.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
It's okay, don't worry. You can't see everybody. I was just wondering whether there is some help from other professors or assistant professors for new faculty members, or not necessarily formal training, but even that, but even informally. Or do they expect you just to start going?
I think my, so maybe since I've gone through this most recently, my experience kind of echoes what Sean was saying, which is just there's a lot of things that you kind of are encountering and you're just unsure about. And so having the kind of, I have 2 people in my department who I just kind of said right off the bat, like, I'm just going to bug you all the time. And they were very, you know, happy to help and everything. And so finding those resources, there are, I mean, there's, you know, orientations and other resources on campus. I've used some of them for teaching and other things that you can find. And so there are definitely resources, but it just, it sometimes is a matter of finding them. The one thing that I found actually very helpful in all this is out of my grad school experience, I have this network of women that we all kind of every month we get on a Zoom chat together, check in. We're just have been good friends for a long time. And those are also the kind of resources, not at my institution, but that have just helped me kind of navigate this because they've all gone through it, you know, in the years prior to when I had. So those are the things that I think that's been my experience so far.
Thank you. And do they require any teaching certificates or teaching skills or, I mean, beyond graduate teaching assistancy or not?
The whole professional model seems to be you get trained how to write research papers and shoot down other people's research papers and trained how to do absolutely nothing else that you must do in this profession. So I was going to say, actually, if there are opportunities as a grad student to do some of those teacher training courses, I didn't take advantage of those as a PhD student. That's something else I would change, is try to get some actual formal training in teaching. Another thing that becomes available, I don't know if to PhD students, but in some schools for faculty, is you can get media training. And that's just like a really cool privilege to, it really helps you with the whole range of your communication skills. But then later down the road, when you're starting to try to communicate your research to journalists or other, you know, stakeholders outside of academia, I thought that those training opportunities are very cool and very scary because they'll like videotape you and criticize your voice and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome, thank you so much. So I think our time's almost up. Before we conclude, I'll just ask our panelists if you have any last inspiring or motivating quote that you would like to share with us.
I didn't really have a quote, but I did have an image at one point during the PhD. My mom had sent me this card. This is image of a girl pushing a boulder up a hill, and it was just about having strength and kind of just working hard and being able to get through it. And so then when I was done with my PhD, I'm going to share an image with you really quickly. I was on a camping trip in Maine with my spouse, and we decided to recreate that image of me pushing the boulder down the hill this time, which was just something that I kind of was like kept in my mind as I was going through it, and then afterwards too, because it's just you know, you just are able to kind of remind yourself of how much you've accomplished. And so it gets to that point. You will at some point it will start to feel a little different. And that's what helped me get through some of that too.
Yeah, my partner's also in academia, and you're often doing these big projects that take a long time to mature. And one of the ways we always encourage each other is from, I think it's a book on fiction writing that I've actually never read, but the book's called Bird by Bird. And the concept is that like you do like little things and bit by bit, like a bigger picture emerges. So we tend to encourage each other with that. Thanks for giving me the chance to be involved in this, and the students should feel free to follow up with me if they have questions they think I could be helpful with. Thanks.
Yeah, just to echo what Greg said, certainly feel free to follow up. I'm happy to talk with anybody in the future. And I just, in terms of inspiration, I thought it was important to celebrate small wins in grad school. Every step along the way, A exams, going to your first conference, these things, because they do build up over time. And it's important to celebrate and mark sort of this forward moving in your career.
Yeah, I think the simple fact that you are in this room right now show how motivated you are. So just keep it up, and I think it's worth to pursue this career. Good luck, everybody.
Same here. Just keep it going. You know, when it gets tough, you know, persevere. And I guess the one last thing, and I know everybody would tell you this, and it's easier to say than to do, try to have fun and try to make the experience as fun as possible. Because the whole point, you know, you're not getting paid doing a PhD. You're not getting paid until you get a job. And it's a huge chunk of your life. So if you're just going to be miserable for, you know, half a decade, you know, you're going to look back and you're going to say, I kind of wish I was less miserable and did some things to make my life a little better. So, you know, go out for a walk, have a beer with somebody. If you're frustrated and you're annoyed, you know, shut off in some way or another. Because, you know, you'll notice once you get there, once you 5-10 years down the road, those small things that frustrated you and annoyed you will seem like nothing. And so that's it.
Well, I want to thank you all the panelists for being with us here today, and also Stephen. So we still have a couple more minutes till we wrap up around 1:30. So we want to open up the floor to anyone who has any further questions for our panelists or any last minute thoughts that you want to share with the group. You can feel free to unmute yourself or just type in the chat box right now. Okay, if there are no last minute questions, I'll send out a Google Form link right now. This is just to get some feedback from you guys about how today's consortium went and what you liked about it and some things you want to see in next year's consortium. And if you can fill out the forms, and we'll also ask you for your name and your mailing address to mail you the reimbursement check. Again, one more time, just want to thank you to our wonderful panelists for sharing your experience with us and being with us here today. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.